Mr. President, it's a busy day. There's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. Quite frankly, at home, there's a lot going on in homes and families and lives. Today's also a unique day for America as well. It's one day a year that we as a nation have called something called the National Day of Prayer. It started in 1988 with an official day, this day, the first Thursday of May. But in the 1950s, Harry Truman started this process of a National Day of Prayer. It far precedes that. Our nation has a rich and beautiful history in prayer. Members of the House and the Senate, as you know, open the day every day with a prayer. It's been that way from the very beginning. Even the First Continental Congress on September the 7th, 1774, opened in prayer. Tonight, Americans will gather in Statuary Hall in the United States Capitol to celebrate the National Day of Prayer. Statuary Hall was once the House of Representatives. It's where the House gathered. It was also the largest gathering place in Washington, D.C., and many churches for years met in Statuary Hall to be able to pray. It was the common meeting place. In fact, for a period of time in the early 1800s, 4 churches a Sunday used, at that time, the House of Representatives chamber, what's now known as Statuary Hall, as their place for worship. Thomas Jefferson attended worship there. In fact, every president from Thomas Jefferson all the way to Abraham Lincoln attended church on Sundays in Statuary Hall, or what it was at that time, the House of Representatives chamber. Interesting fact, I've had folks talk about Thomas Jefferson's statement about the wall of separation between church and state. That was actually in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association saying that they would not allow the state to go take over churches, that there'd be this wall of separation between church and state. 2 days after President Jefferson wrote that statement, he attended church in the House of Representatives chamber on a Sunday. Even earlier in our Constitutional Convention in 1787, Benjamin Franklin stated, "In the beginning of this contest with Great Britain," meaning our revolution, "when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection." Many U.S. presidents have signed proclamations for national prayer since 1789, from George Washington all the way to the present. The National Day of Prayer is a good day for us just to be able to reflect as a nation, to be able to remember well that there are many people of faith in our country that do believe that there's a Creator God, and He's made a difference in our own personal lives, and He's made a difference in our nation. If we go back to President Truman's statement, he said in 1952, "The President shall set aside and proclaim a suitable day each year, other than a Sunday, as a national day of prayer, on which the people of the United States may turn in God to prayer and meditation at churches, in groups, and as individuals." And then, as I mentioned, in 1988, President Reagan even affirmed that. Now, I don't think I could find very many Americans that would say we're running out of things to pray for. Debt, anger in the nation, conversation about hard, difficult issues that we face, terrorism, threats of violence from around the world. We're not out of things to pray for. Far from it. But people of faith believe that regardless of the obstacles that we face, there is a God that we can call out to who hears us and who cares about our daily lives. He's not a God that just created and walked away. He is a God who we can know and we feel confident knows and loves us. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." I'm always encouraged when I travel around Oklahoma and around the nation. I even ran into some people this week who stopped me in the hallway and just said, "Hey, I want you to know I pray for you." I encourage Americans to pray for the president, for the vice president, for their cabinet, for the Supreme Court, members of the Senate and of the House, the staff that serve around us and with us, that serve people around this country, for our military, first responders. The list could go on and on, of people that set aside their time and their life to be able to serve. It's not an unreasonable request to be able to say, pray for them. Ask God to continue to protect them. It's amazing to me how many Christians that I bump into of my own faith that find it easier to complain about government than it is to pray for those in government. I think that's an issue we need to fix. And today's a good day to begin that, this National Day of Prayer. I remember well, for me personally, I grew up around a church. My mom drugged me to church, and I mean it. She made me go. But I remember extremely well sitting in the balcony of church one Sunday and actually paying attention to our pastor as he's reading through Scripture. Probably for the first time in my life, I started actually thinking about this one simple truth. There is a God, and I don't know him. Couldn't shake that reality. Laying in bed late that Sunday night by myself, I remember praying, probably for me for the first time in my life, actually praying. And I prayed a very simple 8-year-old prayer. My prayer was, God, I don't know you, but I know I've done things wrong in my life, and I need your forgiveness. Would you come into my life and take control? It was the beginning point for me, just the most simple of ways for me to begin a relationship with God, trusting in his forgiveness and his ability to forgive. I have in my office 2 paintings that hang. One painting is the hands of a potter at a wheel, shaping the clay as they choose to. It reminds me of the sovereignty of God. And below it has a painting of those same hands sitting at that same wheel or sitting at that same bowl holding it, but this time the bowl is done and it's full of water. And there's a towel in it and there are feet around the bowl. And it reminds me of the call to servanthood that we all have, to be able to serve people in the most humble of ways. It reminds me there is a God and he's called us to a task. And part of that task is to pray. And the National Day of Prayer is not a mandate from the federal government that all people should pray. Far from it. It's just a reminder. It's a reminder for people of faith that choose to pray that this is a good day we could reset, to be able to pray for our nation and for our leaders. It's an acknowledgement, quite frankly, that millions of people of faith believe in God, and that those individuals believe that God hears our prayers and responds, so that we should pray. Culturally, it's fascinating to me to be able to talk to people about prayer. I run into some people that find it perfectly permissible in times of great struggle and anguish to pray, but in times of thanksgiving, it seems odd. Let me give you a for instance. A couple of years ago, a football coach in our country was fired from his job because at the end of a football game, he would kneel down, he would kneel down after the game was over and thank God for the safety of his players. For that, he was released from his job because for some reason, Americans don't accept prayers of thanksgiving. But at those same football games, if a player was injured and the coaches and players were to kneel down, the crowd would see that as a good sign of respect, that we respect someone who's injured, and it's entirely reasonable to pray when there's an injury on the field, but maybe not if it's just a prayer of thanksgiving. It's an odd season for us as a nation, trying to figure out who we are and what we believe, and if Americans of faith can live their faith. I would challenge us as a country, for those of us that have faith, to be able to live our faith with integrity, with consistency. And on a National Day of Prayer like this, to remind our nation that there are millions of people of faith, but there are also millions of people that have no faith at all. They're also Americans, and they're also to be respected, because many people are on a journey with God. There are many people that don't practice faith at all today that consider simple things in their life. Their financial house may be in order, their family life may be in order, but their spiritual life remains a vacuum. And they're quite frankly trying to figure that out. I'm always interested about the stories about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, in his earliest political campaigns, was chastised that he was anti-faith or that he was secretly an atheist because he never attended church everywhere. He said that he had respect for the Bible and read the Bible and had respect for faith, but he just personally didn't practice it. And in his earliest campaigns, he was really challenged by that and only narrowly won at times. In fact, lost some of his campaigns that he attributed to losing those campaigns because people challenged him that he was anti-faith. But then we read his words when he was president of the United States, and we find a person that was on a journey with God, that wasn't anti-faith, he just didn't practice faith. But listen to these words in 1863 from President Lincoln. He proclaimed the National Day of Prayer, as every president before him had, and he wrote this: "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years in peace and in prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand that's preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched us and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and by virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness." That's a man who was on a journey with God, who came to the presidency as a person of no faith, and who understands the responsibilities, and his heart dramatically changed. It's a good day for us to reflect on this National Day of Prayer. And I would encourage the nation, if they choose to be able to watch and join in, or to just quietly be able to pray on your own, to remember again that those of us who pray for others should probably spend some time praying for ourselves as well. And at times as we criticize others, we should probably self-evaluate and ask the simple question, do we live the values that we demand of others? It's a good day to pray. Later tonight, I'll stand in that historic statuary hall where presidents and members of Congress and individuals have prayed for a long time. And I'll read Daniel chapter 9 to the group, which reads, now, God, hear the prayers and petitions of your servant. For your sake, look with favor on your desolate sanctuary. Give ear, O God, and hear us." It's a similar prayer that many of us pray in gatherings all over this Capitol every week as members of the House and the Senate and staff quietly find places in this building to pray. It's not a bad idea for the nation to join us. Hear, O God, our prayer. We need your help. With that, Mr. President, I yield back.